This is the Logitech G512, a gaming keyboard that I've been using for quite some time. The keyboard's design may look familiar for those who have used the G413, as it essentially uses the same chassis, only with RGB. There is another variant called the G513, which is identical to the G512. The only difference is that it includes the wrist rest, extra keycaps, and a keycap puller. The G512 sports thin bezels with a brushed aluminum backplate under the keycaps, which makes it look nice and premium but is also a hassle to clean. Underneath the keyboard there are 6 rubber pads which stop it from sliding around, along with 2 feet which you can pull out to angle the keyboard. There are also cable management slips which you can use to tidy your peripherals. It's a nice and simple design without having too much of a gamer aesthetic, which I like a lot. Behind the keyboard there is a thick cable which terminates in 2 USB-A connectors, one for the keyboard and another for USB pass-through. Next to it we have the USB port which you can use to connect external storage or a mouse. There is, however, a strange hole on the back which is apparently used for a Vive tracker, but your guess is as good as mine. The keycaps themselves are ABS plastic rather than PBT, so expect to see some significant wear over time, not to mention how easily your fingerprints will stick. The keyboard lacks dedicated media buttons, and for some reason it doesn't have an indicator for numlock, only caps lock and gaming mode. While the G512 doesn't have media buttons, it does have media controls found along the top row. You can use the F and invert key in G-Hub settings, which is a serviceable substitute. I just prefer media buttons as I find them more convenient. Arguably a defining feature of the keyboard is that it uses mechanical switches rather than rubber domes. The key differences between the two is that mechanical switches don't need to bottom out to register a key press, and pressing a key is much smoother and less squishy than membrane keyboards. So let's move on to the switches themselves. The variant I got was the GX Blue switches, though in reality they're KO Blue switches, a Cherry MX clone. The switches have an audible click and a nice tactile feel when pressed. It has a 4mm travel distance with the actuation point at 1.9mm and an actuation force of 50 grams. So, how do the switches sound? They're incredibly loud. Depending on your tolerance for noise, these switches might not be to your liking. It sounds satisfying in my opinion, but it is a bit louder than what I'm used to. Given that this keyboard has RGB, it's almost impossible not to talk about. You may have seen some variations of the keyboard where the media and secondary legends were lit, and some where it isn't. It turns out the secondary legends only light up on the Roma G variants and not on the GX Blue switches. This is likely due to the GX Blue switches having their LEDs on the top rather than being centralized, which explains why the letters are placed higher on the keycaps. The downside is that it can be hard to see these secondary lights, especially in dark environments, and because the LEDs aren't centralized, you tend to get more noticeable light bleed. Furthermore, if you're using a color which is a mix of 2 or more colors, the light from each individual LED can reflect off the keycaps. In this example I used white, which I noticed had a slight bluish hue to it, and because of the light bleed mentioned earlier there was some red, green and blue reflecting off the keycaps. The G512 has individual key backlighting with 16.8 million colors to choose from, and can be customized using G-Hub. There are a number of lighting presets to choose from. Here are just a couple. With that all said and done, is the keyboard worth $140? Personally, no. I'd wait until the price drops to $120, or you could do what I did and find a barely used one on eBay. Mine costed $80 with shipping. The keyboard is well built and feels nice to type on. It could do with a few additions such as the media keys and numlock indicator. Having macro keys wouldn't hurt either. That's pretty much all I had to say for now. Thanks for sticking to the end. I'll see you guys whenever.